Hey, everybody. This is Devin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. We're going to do yet another live stream. And what we have here, J.R. Nyquist, geopolitical analyst, one of my favorites out there, as well as a frequent guest on this show. And one of his blog posts, essays really, I don't even like to call it a blog post because what he writes is essays or papers. They're actually high quality pieces he writes, whether you agree or disagree. And he wrote this paper on June 12th, 2022 on his blog, J.R. Nyquist blog, and it's titled "A Chinese Riddle, War by All Means." And there was this quote that really caught my eye. It was excerpted from Soviet Military Strategy. That's by Soviet Army Marshal Sokolovsky, Vasily Sokolovsky. And this is an interesting passage, and it really applies to today. And now, Soviet military strategy was written, I believe, in the early 1960s when the world, particularly in the West, started to globalize its economy. The United States started to slowly get lower its tariff barriers to imports from some of the Eurasian countries, Asian allies of the United States, as well as also those of Western Europe. And, the imports pinch started to be felt. That's something that Truman, Eisenhower, and JFK started to really implement. And so he wrote, the vulnerable features of the imperialist bloc's economy. When they say imperialist bloc, they mean the United States and its allies in Asia and Europe, at least at that time. Japan, West Germany, Britain, France, at least until somewhat Charles de Gaulle, Italy, I said Japan already, and Canada, like-minded NATO countries and other allies of the United States. So let me read it again. The vulnerable features of the imperialist bloc's economy include high industrial concentration in small areas, dependence on imports, and the vulnerability of communications. The United States depends upon imports of atomic raw materials and of non-ferrous and rare metals. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? That means the Soviets viewed during the height of the Cold War our growing free trade policies as a weakness. The Soviets, and now the Russians, as we'll talk in a couple of live streams, because they're playing games with oil and gas, and now our dependence on fertilizers and other chemicals by the Russians, they're using that as a stick to beat us on. So it shows that neoliberalism, Milton Friedmanism, is the best friend our enemies have, because they have us by the neck in this sense. Again, let's say there's a revolution in Saudi Arabia where we do get oil. Now, we are a major producer of oil, but let's say there's a revolution in Saudi Arabia, or we import much oil from Russia. And now, as a result, with sanctions on Russian oil, we're feeling a pinch. It's not the only reason why. But when a country cuts you off from supplies, or you're trying to pursue some geopolitical goal and you decide not to trade with countries, they will use that as a weapon to bring down your economy. You see where I'm going? Stalin, back in the early 1920s, viewed the third world's reserves of cheap labor, the raw materials that we get from third world countries back in the 1920s, i.e. the colonies from the Western colonies. He called them the rear of imperialism. And then you got to take over the rear of imperialism in the third world in order to bring upon ultimately a revolution and economic collapse in the advanced capitalist countries. This is why Tea Party, Reagan, free trade, free market economics is not in the strategic national interest. And the way to now fight Russia and China, not nuking them or invading them, but really to be strong against them and to be a near impenetrable fortress against economic warfare conducted by, say, a Russia or China, is pursuing autarky or partial autarky in key raw materials and manufactured goods that can be produced here or extracted from here. And it's the same thing as food. I mean, I wish more people would understand this. It's time to throw out Milton Friedman and Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Thatcher and Reagan and Donald Boudreaux and the Cato Institute and the Club for Growth, the whole Koch network and the Freedom Caucus. It's time to pack that shit and throw it down the toilet already, okay? I know I'm using cussing words so much. I'm using that not because I like to do it, but it's a way of getting a point across that makes me sound hopefully a little animated too as well. Now, I don't want to sound like always a boring professor here. I mean, I do have an academic side, but let's face it, this stuff pisses me off. And I used to believe in this shit too. I used to believe in free trade and free markets. I was a John Bircher. I voted, I think, for the Libertarian presidential candidate in the year 2000. I mean, so I was a part of that milieu. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't make good points. They do. But there has to be a better balance. Capitalism needs to be subordinated to the needs of national security. Utopian, high-minded, libertarian, or classical liberal economics does not work. It doesn't work in the real world where you have geopolitical enemies, where you have trade rivals, where you have trade competitors, and things of that nature. Doesn't work. Solution to this? Well, number one, we have to have policymakers that take what, for example, Marshall Sokolovsky in his book, Soviet Military Strategy, this shit needs to be taken seriously. And it needs to be incorporated into national policy where we produce as much critical strategic commodities, goods, including food, rare earth metals, uranium, and things of that nature as much as we can. And also manufacture goods within the territory borders of the United States. And I'm not talking about Puerto Rico and some of America's colonies. I'm talking about within the lower 48 states of the United States. I'm not so comfortable with it being moved to Alaska or factories in Hawaii because they are territorially very vulnerable on the high seas. And Alaska is so close to Russia that leaves concerns about invasion. So there are production facilities. Obviously, I would not put it there. And also just, it's just they're not known for those types of activities, Alaska and Hawaii. I mean, yes, Alaska has oil production, although that's restricted because of environmental needs. I get that. But my point is we need to have at least a sense of a rational partial autarky. And we need to use the full force of the federal government in cooperation with business, labor, and local and state governments to achieve this goal. And Congress needs to get together now. Our inflation that we are experiencing and the further deteriorating financial position of many Americans is a result of the supply chain crisis. And if we had more of our production within the borders of the United States, we wouldn't be suffering through this as much. So again, neoliberalism, need to throw it out, need to throw out laissez-faire liberal economics. It needs to be dead and buried, and we need to pursue a healthy economic autarky in production and extraction of critical goods for America's armed forces as well as for the average Americans. I want to thank you all for joining this live stream, and I think I got one or two more coming up. Take care.